Hello, crafty friends. This is Anya Yinol with Ink, Paper, Scissors. Welcome back to my channel. This week, I have something a little different for you. A fun unboxing video where I create 5 stunning cards using the Waffle flower products I recently purchased. Instead of focusing on just one technique, we'll be covering several, including the shadow layer effect, dry embossing, shaker cards, ink blending, and more. Before we jump in, I want to say thank you for all the wonderful comments on last week's Distress Oxide video. I will be making a follow-up video where I create cards with those backgrounds, so stay tuned for that. Also, a quick heads up, you will see some shadows in the lighting setup for this video. I apologize for the change, but once I realized I was creating shadows, I went back to my usual lighting. Thanks for understanding. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. I have linked all the products used in today's video in the description box below, and you can find even more details on my website. While you're there, make sure to subscribe to my website so you get notified whenever I post new content. Now let's get started. I am starting with the Flying Butterfly die, which cuts out both an outline of the butterflies and the individual butterflies. Since the outline is delicate, I am die cutting it 3 times from 100-pound cardstock to add stability, making it easier to glue down. After separating the butterflies from the outlines, I begin adhering the outlines to a white A2 panel made from 80-pound Neenah Classic Crest cardstock. In a previous video, I used the Bruder's Monroe Aqua Pigment in Gilded to splatter over my A2 panel. I'm using one of those leftover panels today, so I'm adhering the butterfly outlines onto the splattered background. Once my background is complete, I dig into my gel press panels, which I created during a previous live stream, and select 2 for my die cutting. A gradient background for the flowers and a green stencil technique background for the leaves. This makes it easy since I don't have to color them at all. I cut 2 flowers and 3 leaves and used glitter cardstock scraps for the flower centers. Next, I'm using the nested rectangle dies by Waffle Flower to create a shadow layer effect by die cutting a smaller rectangle from the background and a slightly larger rectangle from metallic gold cardstock. This gives me a thin gold border around my panel. After layering them together, I adhere them. Then I move on to my sentiment. Using the Overlapping Hugs Additions stamp set, I stamp all the sentiments at once onto 80-pound cardstock. Because I want to stamp all of them, I keep them on the acetate backing sheet and just stick them to my Misty door with the Best Craft tape by Spellbinders. Then I die cut them with the coordinating dies, which gives me sentiments for 3 of today's cards. I die cut several white layers and glue them together for added dimension. Then it's time to assemble my flower and add foam behind it and my leaves. I offset the flower pieces and glue them together. I add foam behind them so they are ready to be glued to the card. Now it's time to assemble our card. I adhere the butterfly outline panel to an A2 cardstock base from Accent Opaque cardstock. I am using accent opaque cardstock for my card bases as it's a heavy cardstock. And it's a great price. I buy it on Amazon and will link my favorite 2 choices below for you if you're in search of a heavy base cardstock for your card bases. Once my outline is adhered to my card base, I add fun foam behind my panel for dimension. And then I glue my panel centered onto my card base. I arrange the flowers in the lower corner of the shadow panel along with the leaves. I finish with the sentiment "Love You" and add some gems to complete the card. This card is quick and simple since we already have most of our die cutting done. I start with an A2 piece of craft cardstock. I'm using Lawn Fawn Craft, but Gina K also has a great one. I arrange the leftover white butterflies from my first card to fill the background, then adhere them in place. For a touch of shimmer, I take the Brutus Monroe Aqua Pigment in Gilded, place a drop on my glass mat, and splatter it across the background with a brush. While that dries, I die cut my sentiment using the oversized Get Well print dies, the shadow layer from vellum, and the words from gold glitter cardstock. After adhering the words to the vellum, I centered the sentiment on my panel with the word "Friend" below it. Finally, I add gold glitter gems, and the card is done. For the next card, I start with an A2 panel that I previously splattered with the Brutus Monroe Gilded Aqua Pigment. I carefully center the butterfly die onto the panel, leaving space in the bottom left for my sentiment, and die cut it. Then I take another gel press background and die cut the butterfly outline and butterflies from it. I set the butterflies and the butterfly outline aside and work on my shaker window. I flip my panel over and glue down a piece of acetate to cover the butterfly openings. Next, I use thick foam tape to outline the butterfly shape, making sure the foam is sturdy enough to hold up in the mail. After removing the release paper, I add a mix of sequins in coordinating colors using a silicone spoon. Once the shaker bits are in place, I add glue to the foam, then carefully press an A2 panel on top to close the shaker. I align my panel corner to corner as that helps me make sure that I glue it on straight. I flip it over to check the movement of my shaker bits, then glue my butterfly outline onto the acetate. Next, I take my sentiment and adhere it to the left corner of my card. Then I place a few extra butterflies on my card front for interest. I decide that I love that look, so I adhere them with glue onto my card front. Then I realize I need to fill some small spaces in the shaker window between the butterflies. So I die cut another flying butterfly in white cardstock, and I tuck in those additional pieces between the butterflies for a more polished look. You could skip this step, but I think it gives the card a more finished look. I finish the card by adding some gems, and my card is complete. Let's begin working on our fourth card. I start by ink blending the duotone square stencil onto Neenah Classic Crest cardstock using Catherine Pooler Pebble ink. I use an Altenew sticky mat to keep my cardstock and stencil in place. Once done, I move the stencil to offset the squares on the background. You could use a different color for this, but I wanted to keep my background monochromatic since I will be adding lots of color on top. I trim my ink blended panel slightly smaller than 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. Next, I take a rectangle shaker cover by Waffle flower from my stash and I remove the cover film from the shaker cover. Then I bend the edges and align it with my ink blended panel, making sure it fits perfectly inside the shaker cover. If you don't have a shaker cover at home, you could use stamp packaging for this step. Then I use a strong adhesive to add to the edges of my shaker cover. You don't want to use glue here because it will take too long to dry. You want to make sure that it is a strong tape adhesive that bonds immediately and won't open after a few days. I will link the one I use in my visual supply list below. I place my A2 panel inside the Waffle flower rectangle shaker cover, securing 3 sides while leaving the top open to add my shaker bits. For embellishments, I use the floral focal die set, but you could use any flower dies for this. If you don't have any flowers in your stash, this die set is very inexpensive. I die cut 3 flowers out of pink cardstock and 3 flowers out of vellum. Then I die cut 6 leaves out of light green cardstock. Next, I ink blend the edges and the center of the flowers with Pucker Up ink and the leaves with Grass Skirt ink by Catherine Pooler. I pick up my nested rectangle dies again and pick 2 rectangles to create a frame. The largest rectangle is the size of an A2 panel, as I want the frame to frame out my full card. I lay the 2 rectangles onto my glass mat and space them out evenly. Then I adhere some best craft tape from Spellbinders to tape my rectangles together. I die cut a glitter cardstock frame and 2 white cardstock frames so that I can adhere them together for dimension. Next, I add a mix of colors of shaker bits into a little triangle tray and then add them into my shaker pouch. I take my backer off of the last side of the shaker pouch and seal the pouch, moving my shaker bits around. Then I use the same tape adhesive to put on the back of my frame and on the back of my shaker panel. Again, I prefer to use tape here as it doesn't take a while to dry. I adhere my shaker pouch to an A2 panel and then adhere the frame on top around the shaker pouch. This hides the edges and corners of my shaker pouch. Then I adhere my flowers to my vellum flowers by offsetting them. And then I align them on my card front for a simple look. 1 flower in 2 corners with leaves. I use foam tape to adhere the flowers and leaves to my shaker card. Then I take the Love Thanks sentiment stamp and die set, and I stamp the Happy Birthday sentiment with VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink onto a white scrap piece of cardstock. I die cut it and place it in between my flowers popped up with foam. I add 2 more leaves to my card front, making sure they will not compete with my sentiment, and my card is complete. On to our last card. For this card, I used the beige silicone mat that was included with my Anna Griffin Empress die cutting machine. I'm using my clear plate, a metal shim, my beige silicone mat, then my A2 panel with my butterfly outlines on top. Then I place a clear plate on top and run it through my Anna Griffin Empress. This creates a dry embossed butterfly background on my A2 panel, which is a beautiful, subtle background. All machines come with a mat like this. Some are a bit thinner and maybe out of rubber, like the Gemini Junior. I splatter my butterfly background with the Brutus Monroe aqua pigment in the color Gilded for added interest. Next, I die cut 3 pink flowers, 3 vellum flowers, and 8 mint leaves. I also die cut 3 flower centers out of glitter cardstock. Next, I use my Altenew sticky mat to ink blend Flirty Fuchsia onto my flowers and something borrowed onto my leaves. I love ink blending a blue color onto my green leaves. It gives the die cuts a whimsy look. Then it's time to stamp my sentiment. I stamp "You Lift Me Up" out of the same waffle flower sentiment set that I used earlier. I adhere my flowers together using vellum as my base, offsetting the pink flower and then gluing the glitter center on top. So I have all of my pieces ready to complete my card. Then it's time to assemble the card. Then I add foam to all pieces and start aligning them on my A2 panel. I add foam to my sentiment and adhere it in the upper right side of the panel. Then I add some gems and my card is complete. And this wraps up today's video. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this unboxing and the 5 unique cards we created using Waffle flower products. If you found inspiration in this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel for more card making tutorials and creative ideas. Don't forget to check the description box below for links to all the products used today, as well as my website where you can find more details, a visual supply list, and additional resources. Also, be sure to subscribe to my website so you never miss a new post or tutorial. Let me know in the comments which card was your favorite and if you have any questions about the techniques we covered. I always love hearing from you. I will be live this week on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I will also be back next week with another scrap video or technique-focused tutorial. Until then, happy crafting, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.